Grammar Lesson 10.1, the imperfect tense. In Units 8 and 9, we learned about the preterite tense, which was used to talk about the past. Today we're going to learn about another tense in Spanish that also talks about the past. This one functions a little bit differently though. The imperfect tense is used to talk about the way things used to be. We use this when we're speaking about ongoing events in the past. Some common words and phrases that we use with the imperfect tense include siempre, which means always, nunca, which means never, muchas veces, which means many times or can mean often, todos los días, which means all the days or every day. Let's talk a little bit about the differences between the preterite tense and the imperfect tense. Now you know that both of these tenses are used to tell about the past. Let's review the preterite tense first. In Units 8 and 9, we learned that we can use the preterite tense when we're talking about a completed action in the past. The preterite tense is describing something that was limited in time. And the preterite tense can be used when something interrupts an ongoing action. The imperfect tense is used in different ways. When we're using the imperfect tense, there's not necessarily a definite beginning or end to the action that happened in the past. The action might have been ongoing. Sometimes we use the imperfect tense to kind of set a background or give some background information about a situation. The imperfect tense is also used when we're telling time and when we're talking about someone's age. We also use the imperfect tense to describe something that could be right, wrong, or impossible. And lastly, we use the imperfect tense with the ir plus a plus infinitive formula to express that someone was going to do something in the past. Let's talk a little bit about how to conjugate verbs in the imperfect tense. For AR verbs, I've used the example cantar. As you know, when you're conjugating verbs, you take the AR ending off and substitute with a new ending. These would be your conjugations, or your 6 different endings, for AR verbs in the imperfect tense. ER and IR verbs are going to look a little bit different. And these are your 6 verb endings for ER and IR verbs in the imperfect tense. You'll want to make sure you copy down these examples and at least the verb endings into your notes. Oh, someone seems to have a question. Okay, go ahead, sir.
Are the first and third person singular forms supposed to look the same?
Great question. The first and third singular forms do look the same. In the example with the verb cantar, you'll notice the yo form is cantaba and the el, ella, usted form is also cantaba. This is correct and this is the way it's supposed to look. Now, since these are identical forms, it's very important that you include a subject if it's not already known who it is that you're talking about. Otherwise, someone doesn't know whether whether I'm talking about myself, I'm talking about my sister, my mom, my grandfather. You have to clarify when you're using the imperfect tense. Any other questions? Yes, go ahead, sir.
What about stem changing verbs?
Stem changing verbs. Great question. Luckily, there are no stem changes that occur in the imperfect tense, so you don't even have to worry about whether or not a verb is stem changing in other tenses. None of them will stem change in the imperfect tense, which is nice and easy to remember. Any other questions? Yes, sir, go ahead.
Are there any irregular forms in the imperfect tense?
Another great question. There are a few irregular forms in the imperfect tense. However, you can breathe a sigh of relief because unlike the preterite tense where there were tons of irregular verbs, there's only 3 in the imperfect tense. Those 3 irregular verbs are ir, ser, and ver. Here's what the conjugations look like for ir. Here are your conjugations for ser and your conjugations for ver. You'll notice the conjugations for the verb ver don't look that different from regular ER and IR verbs. The only difference is that instead of taking the ER off and then adding the ending, you're simply taking the R off and you're leaving the letter E on there. You'll notice that some of these forms, such as the vosotros form and the ustedes form, look kind of weird because they have extra vowels in there. Not necessarily extra vowels, but just a lot of vowels. And I agree, it does look strange, but in this case, they're actually correct. You've learned the rule where an I changes to a Y between vowels, and the reason that doesn't happen with the imperfect form of the verb ver is because the I has an accent, and that rule really only applies to unaccented vowels. Let's look at a couple of examples of how the imperfect tense is used, so you'll feel a little more comfortable with it. We're going to use the verb trabajar because that creates my favorite word in the whole Spanish language, trabajaba. Here's one example. Yo trabajaba al banco. So this sentence could mean I used to work at the bank or I was working at the bank. Either way, it was an ongoing thing in the past, not a one-time isolated incident like in the preterite sentence, Yo trabajé al banco. That sentence would have indicated that it was a one-time thing. Yo estaba trabajando al banco. I was working in or at the bank. So this is an example of how you can use the verb estar with the present participle or gerund, trabajando, to express that it was ongoing in the past. Here's an example of how to use the ir plus a plus infinitive formula in the imperfect tense. Yo iba a trabajar al banco. I was going to work at the bank. So one final reminder, and the main thing you need to remember about the imperfect tense is that it simply is talking about the way things used to be in the past. So we use the imperfect tense when we're talking about ongoing actions, whereas the preterite tense was used for one specific incident or event in the past. If you have any more questions, let me know.